and they start cavitating and things like that. There's really the best progression to start with. The very first thing you want to check is your inline filter. People think that's not it. You build up, especially down in the south here, you'll build up slime on that filter from the algae and stuff growing in your tank, and that can reduce the flow and cause a lot of cavitation and starving of your pump and things like that. If you throw just a tiny bit of bleach in your tank every once in a while to kill that, it's not going to be enough to really damage your pump. I'm not saying dump gallons and gallons of bleach in there, but I know every one of you have bleach. Put just a little bit in there once in a while and clean that out, that's fine. That's what they use to sanitize the water that you drink. So a little bit of that will help. If you put a lot, you can actually begin to break down the seals in your motor and things like that. But very first thing is you're going to check your inline filter. You're going to check your connections, make sure nothing got loose. You're going to make sure if it's a pressure loss situation, first thing you want to check is make sure your throttle's up all the way. And then most of you should kind of understand the tone from what it sounds like if it's running. Make sure your throttle's up all the way. Make sure that your tip is not like hogged out and worn, because it's, well, this tip's only 3 years old. How can it be worn out already? The opening's that big and it's like, I have no pressure. If I take it off, I have more pressure. But when I let off the trigger, it builds to 3,000 PSI like it's supposed to. Well, that's what the pump's supposed to be doing. That's what the unloader will do for it. So those would be the big things you want to check first. Next thing we're going to get into is we're going to want to check, and I should have my pliers, but I don't. So I'm just going to try to reach in here and grab them. We're going to want to check our check valves. What we'll do is we'll take our valve caps off, and we're going to go into our check valves here, and we're going to check everybody see that? Am I in the right spot? You're going to check the springs here for any type of pieces of debris stuck in them. A piece of Teflon tape can wrap around the spring and cause it to not seat. You have the tappet, which is the little part that goes up and down, and the seat, which is this bottom part. And you're going to check all those different parts for any type of debris or foreign matter. The check valves can actually come apart. So you have your cage, which is the black part right here. You want to check that for any type of damage, if they're cracked or crushed. Sometimes they'll go in crooked, and when they screw them down, they'll actually twist and crack the cage. You have the spring. You're going to check your spring for any sign of debris if they're cracked or broken. The tappet, you want to inspect the seat right here for any type of, in this area here, right where it touches the tappet touches the seat, you'll actually see a lot of pitting and things in there. Really aggressive water, especially down here, you'll get really fine sand that's mixed in with your water. It'll actually basically sandblast these and make it a really rough surface. That it should be shiny like you see, if you want to pass one around. It should be shinier like that. If it's really rough and gritty, it prevents it from seating properly. And what happens is it's a check valve, so as the water is being pressurized, it actually forces its way back through instead of being trapped into that area. So that pulsating effect, that forward and back, will actually cause your pump to pulsate. You feel that vibration in your line. And then the final thing is your seat. You want to check that, make sure that there's no nicks, same thing, debris, things like that caught in there. So you're going to pull all your check valves out. You're going to check those. While you're pulling those out, you're actually going to, you like my O-ring pick? This is high quality. Power wash store? Yep, available at the power wash store. Are you good? What's this, Mike?
Shaft. The shaft. The shaft at the power wash store.
You're going to check the bottom inside where the check valve sit. On the bottom there's an O-ring. And what happens is the check valve itself.
Show him the proper way to check that check valve whenever you're quick in the field. See, he's good at that.
Okay, you quick way to check it. You blow on it. It'll actually, you'll hear it when I blow coming off the seat, and then if you suck back, it should actually seal. What?
So do we have that audio on tape?
Yeah.
Yeah, blow the shaft.
Blows up, and you get the shaft. There you go. Where the O-ring, where the check valve sits into the head of the pump, there's an O-ring on there. And a lot of times what will happen is this O-ring, you want to inspect that for any type of damage. Sometimes they'll be completely missing. And what will happen is, that actually is what helps make the liquid tight seal against the head of the pump. It sits on there like this. You can kind of see on the demo one here, there's the O-ring, it sits on the head here. So the O-ring actually sits on the bottom of the check valve, like so, and then seats right into the head of the pump right here, and that's what makes the liquid tight seal. So when the water comes through and the check valve seats, that prevents anything from flowing past. If that O-ring is gone or missing or worn, it'll allow the water to flow past back into the suction chamber, the intake chamber, which will actually cause a cavitation and a vibration as well. Also a loss of pressure. It's like running a car when you're down a cylinder. You don't have any power. This is the same thing. It just uses water instead of gas and air. So the other thing you're going to want to check while you got those out is you can look actually down into the seat, into the where the check valve sits, actually right down in this area here, and that is where you're going to look for any type of washout. If the O-ring is gone and been missing, what will happen is the check valve itself will bounce onto the head of the pump and actually wear down the head of the pump. And some of these have it, but basically what you can do is you can take your pick, which I'll have to get. Shut up, Mike.
I'm critiquing him on this class, just so y'all know.
He's being a
He's failing right now.
pain in the.
You forgot to
I'm at that point. I'll just use this as my pick. I don't want to stab you with it. So what you can do is take a pick, and if you run it across the head of the pump, you'll actually feel a little ridge there. There might be a little ridge, which is normal, but if you feel an excessive ridge inside there, you could have your pump head washed out. And that'll be damage from the check valve, from the O-ring going away and running it too long with it vibrating and cavitating.
What do you do if that's the case?
Buy a new pump.
Where about you sell it?
You can buy a replacement head. It's going to cost you more to buy the head, the valves, the packings, the brass, everything you need to replace it, the caps and all the different types of stuff. You can reuse some of the other stuff, but a loaded head actually costs like $10 more than an entirely new pump.
Really?
I'm gonna price it once.
It's just, it's not, it's a pain because you gotta, switch the, the shaft and everything around. I guess you could buy the new pump, pull the head off and put it on your old pump, but you're better off just changing the whole thing and keeping it for spares. So we're gonna check the check valves on both the inlet and the outlet for the same things. We're looking for those things. We're looking for damaged check valves. We're looking for debris. We're looking for the O-rings being missing or worn or anything like that. If we don't find anything in that case, then we're looking into a situation where it's air. Now, we've already gone through the progression. We've checked our inlet for any type of leaks. We've checked our inlet filter. No matter what we do, we just can't get it to build pressure properly. So our next step is going to be opening up the pump itself and looking at our packings and check valves. So we're going to pull these bolts off the head of the pump. And you guys can follow along if you want to do any of this type of stuff on the pumps you got. Do you need a wrench or something? Are you okay? So we're going to take the head bolts off, and there's 8 head bolts that hold the head on. It's a 1/2-inch socket. We're going to pull those off. And what you're going to do, sometimes they're going to be really hard to pull off, sometimes they're going to be easy to pull off. You can actually take a rubber mallet to kind of break it loose. You don't have to remove all your plumbing if you're like a loader is mounted off of this, as long as you're able to pull it off without having it be connected hard plumbed into something where you won't be able to remove it and work on it. So typically I'll leave all that stuff on. I might just disconnect the water hose, or I might even leave it on, just depending on how it's set up. Grab the pump. If you have to, you can grab a couple of screwdrivers. Once you get it cracked off a little bit, and wedge them in and just work it from side to side, each one gently, trying to break off each side equally. Once you get it going and pulling off, it should actually slide off the head of the pump. So that's what it'll look like. What will happen sometimes is one of these brass will get stuck onto the piston like this. When you pull it off, that's okay. Don't worry about that. Just slide it right off the piston. Now here's a good example when we pull this off. This was a cavitating pump. And if you look right here, oh, your thing not working again.
Battery dead.
Lost video.
So if you look right here,
Sorry, there you go, Paul.
you see that?
Oh, that's what's the thing around the mouse.
Okay, that's a crack
I
piston.
tried to move the mouse.
So what'll happen, that little crack right there will let
Okay.
air into the system, and that will give you cavitation.
We have a major issue right here.
Yeah, yours, that one is also slightly cracked.
It's gone.
But that,
Used, slightly used.
that one, a JB Weld and sanding, it might work perfect. And people have tried it. It just doesn't work very good, and then they're buying a new pump afterwards instead of doing it properly.
Clear from the staff.
So we're gonna check while we pull it off right away. One of the things you can do in doing this, your hands will typically get dirty. You can take your hands and actually just rub them over the pistons like that. And what will happen is that, you might not see that, but that dirt will actually embed into that crack because it's opened the polished surface and it's a little bit rough. So you'll be able to, you see that?
Paul, what brand of pump is that? Is that a general or?
This is a general pump, TS 2021. This pump will rebuild basically the same as an AR, as a Comet, as an Udor, as, you know, the only one that's a little bit different is CAT, some giants. CAT uses a specialized tool instead of the packings being inserted like this. Some of them, they screw them in and compress them that way. But the general mechanics of it, they're all the same. There's really not any difference. You have your shaft, you have your connecting rods, you know, and the lobes that move the pistons back and forth. You know, all the internal components, if you look at all the cutaways, they're all very similar in the way they're set up. It's just a matter of, you know, bronze connecting rods versus cast aluminum. You know, heavier push rods, the
That's the Eagle
ceramic
there.
pistons and things like that.
Is that the Eagle?
That's a general. These are all general. So when we do that, after we do that, we're looking at our pistons. So we would actually want to replace this piston. If they're not cracked, you typically don't need to replace them. We're going to pull on the pistons and see if any of them are loose, because that'll tell us if there's a problem in the back end. Sometimes everything up here might be okay, but if one of the connecting rods is loose on the back here, right in this area here, these bolts can actually back out from time to time, and you'll get a little gap in here, which will give play, or they'll break here. And then that piston won't be going back and forth like it's supposed to be compressing the water. So it'll go forward, but it won't go back, and then it gets stuck, and then usually when that happens, though, it's pretty catastrophic. You'll know because there'll be something sticking out of the side of the pump. So we're going to make sure none of those are
Replace
loose.
just a piston, or is it cheaper just to do the pump?
I'm sorry?
Can you replace?
If
just
you,
the
once you
pump?
get beyond packings, check valves and the brass and stuff like that, it's cheaper to buy a new pump. The pistons are okay too, but as soon as you get into any like connecting rods and things like that, unless you have an extra pump, it's not worth it, because when that goes, you know, either it cracks the case or it scars the shaft, and you can put a new one back together. It's just way cheaper for a new pump, and that's not even taking into account any labor, just parts. We parted one out for a guy, and it was like $250 more to try to change that than it was to buy a whole new pump. So, just kind of the nature of the way things are right now in today's, you know, throwaway society.
Question,
You got a question?
Yep.
question. If you have to replace the ceramic piece there, is it recommended to use Loctite on that bolt to put it back in or not? I mean, I've read back and forth, but
You know, you can. They do assemble it with a little Loctite. I would probably use the blue versus like the red, because you don't want to have to.
but if you don't put Loctite on it, it's no big deal.
You don't have anything.
I would have been way more prepared, and I apologize for this, but I had everything set up, ready to go, and then they said, "Oh no, you got to move. We want you over here because we have a conference here today."
If you don't put Loctite on the head of those bolts, is it no big deal?
I usually don't. It's not a big deal as long as you get them torqued properly. Can you go into the trailer and grab me my crescent wrench? Sure. Thank you. We'll go back to that. So we would check the pistons. There's a seal inside there that we can check as well. And when he comes back with the crescent wrench, we'll show you. On the head of the pump, we're going to pull our seals out. A lot of times you should be able to reach right in here and just pull them out like that. However, if you can't, and if you ever watched the Scott Stone video where I was in Phoenix doing a pump rebuild on his, he took his pumps off and just put them away wet, and then all the hard water just scaled that thing up in there. It took me, how long did it take me to get the, like 15 minutes? Boom, boom, with the slide hammer.
Oh, it was bad.
Oh, man, it's terrible. So there's a tool, it's an extractor kit it's called. And what it is it consists of a,
Extractor tool.
yeah, thank you. There's different sizes in here for different pumps. So you want to pick the right size. In this case, it's a 13 mil, what is this one? 20 millimeter.
24.
No, it's a 20 millimeter. 2021 is a 20 millimeter. You actually slide the extractor tool into the packing itself. There is an expander which has a pointed tip on it. Everybody see that okay? That actually screws right into there, and what that will do is, if you look at these sockets, they're split. And when you screw that in there, it actually makes it expand and gets tight onto the brass, because sometimes these things will be just really wedged in there. We have our slide hammer, and we take the bolt that just goes right in there, screws into the expander, and all you gotta do is pop it right out. So that prevents you from damaging the brass when you're
And if you don't have that tool, what's the next easiest way to get it out?
There's also what's called the reverse grip pliers, which the problem with this is when you use these, is it can actually
Damage.
mar up the brass on you a little bit. So you got to be careful with that. Other things that I've done is I will take like the back of a pliers and just get it in here, and just kind of something that's padded and protected. You don't want to be prying on it with the metal, because you can, once you damage the edge of that, you run the risk of, a lot of times there's clearance, and if you do damage it, you want to make sure you sand it back down so it clears and doesn't touch the piston at all. But if you start scratching or score the piston, you're just going to be replacing packings over and over and over again. So you could use your reverse grip pliers and grab it, pull it out. Some of these, if you go flying. Some of these, and I think here's a good example. There's two different types of brass that they make. You'll see this one has like an alignment ring on it, and that actually aligns. Move it, Mike.
There you go.
This actually will align on this ring right here, and that helps keep it aligned in place.
Jason, we'll show you
Some of these
exactly
other-
requirements, since you can't see.
And then they have the other version that doesn't have that. You can see how it's smooth and flat. It's hit or miss why that is. I don't know. They just, you order them, and sometimes they come like this, and sometimes they come like that. I don't know why they did that. But if you do have the kind that has a ring on there, sometimes you can get a pliers on there and get it on there like a big channel lock and wiggle it loose and break it loose with that. So if you get lucky, then. Thanks, Mike, for moving.
You're welcome.
I shouldn't be so rude. I could be rude to you in private, not in public, I guess. All right, so we'll go through the brass here real quick. The packings consist of a head ring, which will, it's flat on the one side and curved on the other. That goes against the head. What that does is that gives the high pressure seal, which is cupped. It helps shape it so that it creates a nice flat surface for it. The seal, and you can, we'll pass this one around, you can actually see it's real worn on the bottom here. The seal actually goes against the ceramic piston, and that's what helps create the tight, watertight seal. You have your intermediate or your life ring, which is actually help to, again, there to help keep the shape of the packing in place. We have your intermediate brass ring, which will sit over the top of that. And then we have our low pressure brass and our low pressure seal. Now there's two different versions. There's the old cat pumps where they actually used to use another high pressure seal and another intermediate ring to do the low pressure. Now they use a real soft, it's almost like a oil seal on a transfer case. If anybody wants to see it, pass it around. Want to see it? Anybody? Good. So that's the low pressure. Yep. Now, one thing you want to remember is that the cup side, and if you look at these, there's a there's a cup side.
Hold on, you got something going on. What's up with the camera?
Woohoo! Look at my hands disappearing. I'm magic. That's pretty freaky.
Yes,
That's freaking me
It's
out.
getting worse.
Now I'm dancing. Heck yeah! How do I do that? I'm pretty good. But with any of the seals, you want to remember that the cup side, which is the concave side, will always be towards the pressure, so we'll go into the head of the pump. It's a lot easier to install them the other way, but it's not going to work. You're going to have water squirting out when it starts pressurizing. So that's one thing to remember. So we're going to pull all our brass out. We're going to check our seals. We're going to look for anything that's worn on them. If you look at some of the seals, you'll see there's like, you can actually see where the piston is actually worn on them. On most of these pumps, it's like that. Where's it back? I don't know if you can see it on this or not. Can you see that at all in there? Probably not.
Yeah, we can
See how it's a little worn right in here? There's like a nick right here on this particular one. It's weird working on a camera. But you're going to look for things like that. That's telling me that this is worn. Typically a sign that you'll see that your packings are worn, if you ever see water dripping out from between the head and the base of the pump here, that's going to tell you that your packings are worn out and they need to be replaced. This one is so old, I mean this thing's as hard as plastic. When they're new, they'll be a little bit softer. One trick you can get for installing these that will help, you can actually heat them up a little bit. If you take a heat gun or a hair dryer or put them out in the sun for a little bit, they'll get a little bit softer and easier to work with. That's okay. That's a trick that I've learned, because when you're doing it in the winter in Wisconsin and it's 40 degrees in your shop and you're trying to install a hard, cold seal, it doesn't work really good. It's hard to do. So we've gone through, we've checked that. We're going to check the brass. Each of the brass has a little hole in it. That's a weep hole. You want to check those, make sure they're not clogged up with anything. Sometimes if you run these pumps too long, they'll superheat and you'll actually melt these plastic pieces and they'll embed themselves into these weep holes. So you want to make sure if they are clogged up that you take a little tool like a welder's tool to clean them out, or a pick or something like that. Sometimes you have to heat them up to melt the plastic out of them. But you want to clean those up, make sure that all those holes are cleared up.
You don't have to put those holes lined up like toward the
No,
bottom.
there's no particular place anything has to be as far as that's concerned. You're going to inspect the head of the pump for any type of damage. And here's a good example. If you look at this, both the center and, well, actually, all three of these, the head's cracked. If you look right at the top, you can see all three of them have a crack into the head. And that's going to affect the pressure and everything like that.
So you just quit right there?
Right there. So now for me, exactly, that's why this became a service pump, because you look at it, well, it's not too bad, the pistons, I got one piston, but I open it up and I get to a point, it's like, okay, it's not worth rebuilding, because I'm going to have problems. That's going to allow water to leak past, because you're not going to get a watertight seal.
So tell them what causes the heat in the...
Build up the heat will typically be from when you run your pump and bypass really long, you set it down, and if you've got a closed loop system versus bypassing to a tank, every time that water goes through there, you're creating a lot of friction. In a matter of less than a minute, that water will be up over 180 degrees and start damaging the packings. That's where, like, the legacy pumps come standard with a hot packing. The Udor pumps have a different type of seal, a little bit heavier. They're better at dissipating heat. The general pumps are very good and very inexpensive. But that's one of the things that they're a little bit lighter on some of the components with the aluminum connecting rods and things like that. Make sure none of your brass is cracked or busted or anything like that. I'm going to go back to the pistons here, and one of the things you can check with these pistons,
You can break them too.
you can break them, yeah. They do not tighten these, over tighten these. I believe it is 14 foot-pounds of torque. No, 9 foot-pounds. It's pretty light. It's pretty light.
Is it inch pounds or?
It is foot-pounds.
Foot-pounds.
It's foot-pounds. I can look it up. drawing a blank right now, I got too many things going on. Wow, there's still water here, you can feel it. Sometimes you look at that, it pulls it back, it. There, see? That's actually making a
That's how
pretty
you
good
get
seal.
it.
Well, actually, what it is there's a whole bunch of oil on there from it leaking. So, we're gonna check this seals right here. There's a copper crush washer on here, which is this little washer, and we're gonna check our spacer ring and then our O-ring seat here. What'll happen is those will sometimes wear out or crack or break, and that will allow water to get passed on the pressure side through the piston and into the pump. Now, one of the things people will say is that I got water in my oil. That's typically caused by either packings failing or a cracked piston or one of these O-rings failing. When that happens, you don't have to replace these oil seals on the pump. The only time you have to replace these oil seals on the pump itself is if it's dripping oil out of here. So you don't really want to mess with those unless you have to. And the oil seals are right here. They're right back here for this push rod right here. There's an oil seal. What happens is that if water gets past this packing and past this chamber, it will actually get onto this piston, and as this piston goes back and forth, if it's cracked or if your water's getting in through here and coming out here, it'll actually get flung around. That's what this is called, a slinger washer. And what it's supposed to do is actually sling the water inside this chamber and let it drip out, which is the drips that you see coming out of the pump if you have worn seals. They'll typically, if you're drawing from a tank, you may not see those. It'll actually suck in air there. But if you pressure feed your pump and you start seeing water dripping, what that is that these seals aren't seating tight, or there's a cracked piston, or the seal at the end of the piston bolt is bad and the water's dripping out here. But getting back to what I'm saying is that what happens is that water gets slung around in there, drops of water will get on this shaft, and as this shaft moves back and forth, it'll actually bring the water into the pump past this oil seal. Because the oil seal is designed, and you see again, it's cup side towards the oil. It's designed to keep the oil